Welcome back, everyone, to my 10th and final round recap from the Biel Chess Festival. I'm recording this just after midnight. It is currently Friday the 26th. I played my final round game on Thursday the 25th, which started about 10 hours ago. And in the final round, I was playing against International Master Marco Materia from France. And I actually played him last year in the same tournament. And he's one of the top players in the world for his age. I think he's currently 15 years old and top 10 in the world for 15-year-olds. So definitely a strong player. And he beat me last year. So coming into this game, I wanted revenge. And the game started. He played knight to f3, which is already a deviation from my game against him from last year. If you want to see the recap to that game, I will link it below. But yeah, when preparing for him, I did see that he's been mixing up some of his white repertoire recently. He usually plays Queen's Gambit, but he's been throwing in some Reti Opening. And he actually played a pretty trendy line in the Reti after d5. He played the move pawn e3, which definitely isn't the most common move. But I actually went through a phase last year of playing the same opening as white, also in Biel. So there's been a few deja vu moments already in this game. And the point of e3 is to discourage the bishop from coming out, because if bishop g4, which I would play if white played g3, then white can play c4 and queen b3, and this is a little bit unpleasant for black. So I stuck with my usual setup, knight f6, c4, e6, knight c3, and pawn to b6. And this is usually what I go for. Probably had a lot of games in this online. And the point of this is to just get a very solid, harmonious setup as black, develop the pieces like this, and most likely castle kingside. And we're going to see that for the next few moves, I do follow most of these arrows. After pawn b3, I play bishop b7, bishop b2, knight bd7, rook c1, a6. I start with a6 because I don't want to play bishop d6 and run into knight to b5. So here he takes on d5, I take back with pawn. He plays pawn d4, I play bishop d6. And then he plays a move which I think has become more trendy recently. Of course, the main, or the more common approach for white is to play bishop d3 and castle and queen c2, etc. But instead of developing his bishop to a normal square, he develops it to a less normal square. In this position, he plays g3. And yeah, the point is just to play bishop g2 and castle and have a very safe kingside while applying pressure to the pawn on d5. And I guess one of the points of this setup for white is that if I ever play pawn c5, then d5 could be more of a liability, and there's definitely some logic in putting the bishop on g2 directed against the d5 pawn. So in this position, I play a relatively flexible move, queen to e7, keeping my options open. He plays bishop to g2. And in this position, I play the move which probably is not the most natural looking move. I'd imagine most players in this position would just castle kingside, because this seems like the most obvious place for the black king. But I decided to be a bit adventurous, and I castled queenside in this position. And this wasn't exactly opening preparation, definitely not specific preparation for this opponent, but I was aware of the idea to castle queenside, specifically against the lines where white plays bishop to g2. And I want to go on a bit of a tangent here because a few days ago, a good friend of mine was playing a tournament in Spain. And that friend is WGM Tatev Abrahamian. And she had a really nice victory in almost this exact variation. And after her win, she texted me saying that she used my opening idea. And apparently, probably a few months ago, I had shown her a very similar idea in this variation where black castles queenside, and if white castles kingside, then black can get a very quick attack on the king side with h5, knight e4, g5, h4, etc. And I just want to very quickly show her game. I'll probably just zoom through here, but just to show how similar it was. White basically had the same setup, maybe some small differences with no rook on c1, but it was pretty much the same idea for black, black castle kingside, and then Tatev really just showed no mercy with this, this kingside assault. And once the H file opened, she doubled up, and the game was actually really beautiful. Like black just sacked knight on g3, came in with a queen, came in with a bishop, and yeah, the king was safe in the center for black. And yeah, sacked a rook, played d4, opening up the bishop, and very soon, she sacks another bishop, and yeah, the game ended in checkmate. So a lot of cool sacrifices from black in this game. And this was on my mind when I played Queenside Castling, because I had recently seen Tatev's amazing attacking game, and I felt inspired to do the same. Now, in this position, my opponent started thinking. Clearly, he was not prepared for this move. And rather than castling kingside, which I think a lot of players would do, he played the move rook to c2, which is a slightly mysterious move. And in the moment, I thought that, okay, maybe he wants to create the battery with queen to c1, maybe exert some pressure on the half-open c-file, also maybe prepare a3, b4, which he can't do right away because I have the battery against a3 with my bishop and queen. So I continued here with a very typical move, king b8, getting off the half-open c-file. And then my opponent really surprised me. And after his next move, I honestly had to hold back some laughter because in this position, he played what looks like just a troll move, king to d2, essentially a middle game BONGCLOUD. But it's actually a fascinating decision. And once he played king d2, I realized that the idea of rook c2 was not to put the queen on c1, it's to put the king on c1. And I mean, what's the best way to describe this? Like king d2, I think I'd like to make a comparison to when you're like searching for a home and you're browsing Zillow. You have perhaps a few choices. You can look for a nice home, but maybe that home is in a really sketchy neighborhood. Or you can look for maybe a rundown apartment, but in a nicer neighborhood. And this is kind of the comparison between putting the king on the king side for white and putting the king on the queen side. With white putting the king on the king side, let's say castling, this is basically like having a really nice home in a really dangerous neighborhood. And if my opponent castled kingside, then I would have been really happy. I would have probably started with h5 and played this, and then played like Tatev, probably crash open h-file. If white plays h4, I play this, f6, g5 is coming. And even though the shelter looks nice for the white king, it's about to get blown apart. Meanwhile, what happened in the game when my opponent plays king d2, this looks like a really rundown apartment for whites, maybe a leaky roof. But once the king gets to c1, it's actually very safe, and there's really no danger because I don't really have much attacking resources on the queen side. And I really wanted to punish this move somehow. Like I was looking at c5, but the problem is if I play c5, I'm also weakening the shelter of my own king. And I decided here that I would just focus in the center. I played knight to e4, allowing king c1, and then I played pawn f5. So I was really just trying to get a grip on the center. He continues with king to b1, and I played pawn to g5. So I'm still going for the kingside expansion. White has found a relatively safe place for the king, even though he didn't castle. It does look like he castled. It just took a few moves to get the king to b1. And yeah, in the meantime, I'm really just trying to expand on the king side and provoke some weaknesses in white structure. And going forward, he plays knight to e1. And even though this looks like a passive move, he does want to reroute the knight to what probably is a more useful square on d3, also unleashing the bishop, also getting out of the way of the f-pawn. He has ideas of f3, maybe to kick the knight. So here, I tried to keep the momentum going, and I played pawn to f4. And then things got a little bit tricky, because he plays takes, I take, and then he plays knight to d3. And now there's a lot of focus on this pawn on f4. And I took a lot of time in this position trying to figure out what my best approach was. And I think I took at least like 10 or 15 minutes before making my next move. It took about 15 minutes to play the move queen to g7. I was really trying to keep the tension. I did not want to take on g3 and allow white to open h-file for the rook. And the reason why I played queen to g7 was to create the pin on the g-file. So white can't take on f4, because then I take back. And yeah, the pawn is pinned. I guess white could maybe try taking here, but this would be a very good transformation for black. White would be left with a lot of weak pawns, and yeah, my bishop would have more life on this diagonal. So after queen g7, I'm really just trying to keep the pressure. And then my opponent plays knight to e2. And I'll admit that I overlooked this move during the game. Like, I didn't really see this move coming until he played it. And this turns out to be like a very useful move for white, because he's just attacking f4 another time. He's also helping unleash the bishop, defend the d4 pawn, and basically he's provoking me to take on g3. I didn't see a great way to keep my pawn on f4, so I go ahead and take. He takes back, and now I use the newly half-open f-file to try and exert some pressure against the pawn on f2. He continues here with rook f1, simply defending the pawn. And I play rook d e8, so improving one of my few pieces that wasn't really doing anything in the position. Makes sense to put the rook on the open e-file. And I was still feeling good here. Seems like my pieces have good harmony in the position. And I thought I should be slightly better here. If we compare black's setup to white's setup, white still seems a little bit passive. And yeah, black just seems a bit more active, especially with a knight on e4. But going forward, it's clear that my opponent was definitely holding his ground. He establishes his knight on f4. And now when he played this move, I took another long think, because I basically had two main options I was considering in the position. Now, when he played knight f4, at first this looks like a tactical blunder, because I can take and then take and then take and then take and then take. It seems like black is winning two pieces for a rook. The problem with this line is white has f3 in the end, and then the knight is attacked and my queen is attacked. So I was trying to judge whether it's possible to go into this line. Now, for those watching who maybe can't follow the arrows, don't worry, I'll show this on the board shortly. I was basically debating between going into that line or playing a more controlled approach with the move knight to f6, just improving my knight, reinforcing the center, and trying to be solid. And after a long think, I basically concluded that I can go into this line after takes and takes and takes and takes and takes. And even though I technically lose material, I thought the position is really, really interesting. After queen to g6, he takes my knight, and I take back on e4. And when I saw this from a distance, I actually had a hard time like evaluating what was going on. And honestly, that's one of the reasons why I went into this. I thought that this position is probably going to lead to a lot of interesting and dynamic play, and it should be a 3-result game. Now, I do have a knight and pawn for rook, so I am down material, but there is compensation for black, given that I have control over the e-file, white can't contest it because I have the queen and rook battery. And I was envisioning my knight coming to f6 and then eventually to e4 and maybe eventually playing a5, a4, bishop a6. I thought there's a lot of resources going forward from here for black to improve the position. Now, one quick note, I did analyze this game a little bit with Engine afterwards, and it turns out that I should have probably taken with the pawn. And I did consider this move. I didn't want to leave myself with a pawn that can potentially be targeted, also allow white the potential for d5 to open up the dark sword bishop. But the benefit of this move is it'll allow for my knight to come to f6 and eventually to d5. And yeah, maybe I should have put some more thought into taking with a pawn. But I took with the queen. And going forward from here, I'll just go ahead and say this. My opponent came up with some like really, really strong moves, starting with king to a1. And this is a natural move, just getting out of the pin on this diagonal and ensuring that white can exert more pressure on the c-file eventually. After king a1, I improve my knight, and then he plays queen to c1. So seizing initiative, creating the battery against c7. I had to defend, I played rook to e7. And then he plays pawn f5. And I think this is another like very strong move, ensuring that I can't play queen f5 to blockade the pawn. Ideally, I would have liked to play queen f5 and knight e4 and make sure both white's pawns are fixed on dark squares. But unfortunately, I didn't have time to do it. And when he plays this move, he's opening up his queen. So not only did the queen serve a purpose pressuring the c-file, it's also ready to potentially infiltrate my position. So after f5, I played rook to f7, trying to somehow exploit the pawn, which is now arguably a weakness. I mean, this pawn is potentially a strength, but also potentially very weak if I can move my knight and attack it with my queen and rook and maybe even my bishop. But then he plays rook to f2, so just supporting the pawn, making sure that I can't win it anytime soon. I play pawn a5 here. I'm still going with my resources. Yeah, a5 is multi-purpose, trying to poke some holes in white's setup and also improve my bishop to get it to a6 and maybe chase away the rook from f1. Here he plays pawn to a4, so just making sure that I can't play a4 myself, also making some room for the white king. And now I play bishop a6, he moves his rook, and then I play queen to d3. So things are definitely heating up. And now I do have initiative. I'm attacking the now somewhat backwards pawn on b3. He had to defend it. He played king to a2. And here I play king to b7. And in hindsight, I maybe kind of regret playing this move. The reason why I played this is because I was a little bit scared of black's idea of queen c6. Like if I allow queen c6, then the queen can infiltrate. There's some gnats flying around. They want my my water that's infused with orange. Shout out to whatever brand this is to chase away the gnats. What was I saying? Yeah, I was scared of queen c6 and then potentially like queen e6, and I didn't want intruders in my home. So yeah, I played king b7. Maybe I should have played knight e4. This would have been a bit more active to hit the rook and also unleash my own rook. But this would allow rook g8, and yeah, it's a little bit tricky here. I'm actually wondering, is queen c6 still possible? Threatening rook g8. But then I have bishop b7 attacking the queen. But then queen e8. I don't know what's happening here. It's getting late. I'm tired. I'm sure the engine will know best of what I should have done. But I played king b7, prophylactic move. He played queen f4, and then I played knight e4. So now seizing the initiative, attacking the rook. But yeah, he plays rook to f3, attacking my queen. Had to move. I played queen to e2, and then he plays rook to c1. And over the last few moves, white has definitely made some improvements in the position. Now having the focal point again on c7. And even though it looks like I'm still exerting pressure, it's really hard to crack white's setup. And I had a hard time figuring out like what I should be doing here. The move I played was pawn to b5, really trying to get rid of these pawns somehow. I really wanted to take, and then if takes back, plant my bishop on c4. But unfortunately, this was a little bit slow, because in this position, my opponent starts throwing punches, starting with the move rook to e3, attacking my queen. And now the move I wanted to play here was rook takes f5 to somehow induce a queen trade, but rook f5 just loses instantly to queen takes c7. So my rook is tied down to defending c7. Had to move my queen. I move to g2, trying to keep everything under control. And then he plays another very strong move, queen to e5. So diverting the focus in the center, attacking my undefended pawn on d5. And if he can get in queen takes d5, then it's a triple, actually quadruple attack against so many things which are hanging in my position. So I had to defend this pawn, and I was also getting low on time. I had under 6 minutes to make a few more moves before move 40, and I chose the move knight to d6, which is discovered defense. I'm unleashing my queen, so covering the pawn on d5. And honestly, when I played this move, I thought that everything is still under control. I'm still having this pressure on the queen side. I thought that if takes, I take back, and I'll still have ideas of a4. And yeah, it seems like everything is defended in black's position. But the problem is after knight d6, my position is very, very delicate. And he found what I think is just an absolutely brilliant and crushing move here, which I don't know if it's the final straw that breaks my position or just a complete like bulldozer that runs over my position. But here he sacrifices the rook with rook takes c7. Great move, and this is just leading to a forcing continuation that is completely winning for white. First of all, if I take with my king on c7, he very simply has rook to e3, and I would not be surviving this. My king is tied down to defending the knight. If king d7, then queen e6, my king would be forced back, and I'm losing pretty much everything here. So after he played rook takes c7, I played rook takes c7, but of course the issue here is I lose my knight on d6, he takes it, and now my king is very exposed while his king is super safe on a2. And this was my 40th move, so I had less than 3 minutes to play my next move. But the problem with this position for black is it's really hard to stop white's threats. And white has multiple threats here, of course, pushing the passed f-pawn, but also the idea of rook e6. And unfortunately, I somehow missed this move. I played the move b takes a4. I don't think there is much better, though, for black. It's looking very, very dire. But after I played b takes a4, came in with his rook, and at this point, I just realized that black is completely toast. His rook and queen form the battery against my bishop, also just a 6-rank battery, setting up queen to b6. I played one more move, a takes b3, praying for king takes b3 or king b1 so I can get some more checks and probably just have a mating attack. But he found the safest square for his king on a3. So white's path of the king, I mean, he walked all the way here, found safety, and my king unfortunately did not find safety. And in this position, I resigned because, yeah, what to do? If I defend my bishop with queen f1, he just plays queen b6, and white's completely winning here. If king c8, he could take the bishop, but he can also checkmate me with rook e8, king d7, queen e6, and yeah, it's just game over. So definitely a disappointing loss to finish the tournament, but honestly, I can't really be too disappointed. I think my opponent played really, really well this game. And I mean, after I sacrificed the exchange, I think he just neutralized everything really well and got his pieces in prime position to exploit me tactically. And this game is definitely worth analyzing in more detail to figure out what exactly I did wrong, and also how I could have maybe better use my opening advantage. Because in the opening, I mean, especially when he played King D2, black should be better here. But yeah, according to the engine, minus zero point 0.7. But somehow I couldn't quite keep the advantage like in the middle game. And yeah, f4 was perhaps a wrong approach, even though it looked really good in the moment. Engine says h5. Yeah, perhaps it was worth just being patient and grabbing space and then later going for the appropriate pawn break. But anyway, I will leave a link to the Lichess study with all my games in the video description. So if you want to analyze any of my games in more depth with Engine, you can click the link below. And yeah, feel free to comment any questions or improvements I could have made. It was a fun tournament overall. I'm overall like happy with the quality of my play. I think I got to play a lot of interesting and new openings. I did a lot of preparation for every opponent. I have a lot of unused preparation that I'm hoping I can save for future events. So speaking of, even though this tournament is over, I do have another tournament coming up. In less than 2 weeks, I will be playing in Trondheim, Norway. It's a Lewis Chess Legends event starting August 6th, going through the 14th. And yeah, I'm looking forward to that. I'm also looking forward to getting rest and recovering. It's currently after 12:30, so it's time for me to get some rest. Maybe one last thing before I end the recording. I do want to show the standings and my rating change. Let's go to chess results. Let's click my name, and I'll leave a link to this page as well. But this is chess results. You can see my overall standing in. Can you see? Oh yeah, overall standing in the tournament. Yeah, I finished in 46 on tie breaks with 5.5, tied for 40th. Sorry if it's cut off a little bit, but yeah, here you see finishing just above Talia, who yeah, good friend of mine, fellow St. Louisan. Congratulations to the winners of the tournament. There was a four-way tie for first. Renat Jumabayev winning the tournament on tiebreaks. And yeah, last thing, I'll show my rating change. My grand total, or my grand loss of rating, is half a rating point. So really not so bad. Maybe if I won or drew the last round, I could have gained some rating. But yeah, I play these tournaments not really focused too much on my rating, just trying to focus on playing interesting chess and having fun. And I think my mission was accomplished. So again, thanks everyone for all your support and positive comments throughout the tournament. I really appreciate it. And stay tuned for the next one. And I'll see you guys soon.